Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Bakaja Caldwell, and I am an attorney advisor at the Administrative Conference of the United States. Today, the Committee on Rulemaking is meeting to consider some proposed revisions by the Council on the draft recommendation for consultation with state, local, and tribal governments in regulatory policymaking. We are joined today by one of the project consultants, Seth Davis with UC Berkeley School of Law, as well as one of the council members, Ronald Capp. So first, what I will do is I will call two roles. The first role will be the names of committee members and alternates of committee members. After each name is called, the person should say here, so we can make sure that their mics are working. So first, Bertrell Ross.
I'm here.
Brigham Bowen.
Here.
Amy Bunk.
Here.
Stephanie Davis. I think she'll be joining a little later. Bill Funk.
Here.
Alex Hunt, designated alternate for Alex Goodenough. Elena Ness.
Here.
David Pritzker.
I'm here.
Lon Smith.
Here.
Kevin Stack.
Here.
Jessica Stone.
I'm here.
And Miriam Benson. Okay, is any committee member present whose name I did not call?
Andrew Emery.
Oh, hi, Andrew. Sorry to miss you.
No worries.
Okay. So now the second role will be the names of ACUS members who are not on the committee and their alternates. After each name is called, the person should say here so we can make sure that their mics are working. I will not call the names of members of the public who do not have speaking privileges, meaning you should write in the chat if you would like to speak. So first, Matt Weiner. Helen Serafio.
Here.
Is there any ACUS member present whose name I did not call? Okay. Oh, go ahead.
Kind of.
Ron, besides Ron. Ron Cass, are you here?
I am mostly here.
Thank you. So please reach out via the chat function or via
Hi,
email.
I'm sorry. I joined a minute late. This is Tom Johnson.
Tom, oh, awesome. Thank you, Tom. Okay. So please reach out via the chat function or via email if you experience any technical difficulties during the meeting. ACUS staff will be happy to assist you with troubleshooting or moving to alternative means of participating. So now I will turn it over to Bertrell Ross, the committee chair.
Hi, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'll start by explaining the ground rules for our discussion. Please note that only ACUS members, including government members and their designated alternates, public members, senior fellows, liaison representatives, and special counsels, whether or not on the committee and their designated alternates, have full speaking privileges, meaning a non-ACUS member should write in the chat if you would like to speak. To avoid background noise, I'd ask that you keep your microphones on mute and either use Zoom's hand raise feature or add a comment in the chat feature if you'd like to speak. I'll then call on you and you can unmute yourself. Please then remute yourself when you're done. I'd also ask that ACUS members and their designated alternates use the webcam. With respect to attendees other than ACUS members and alternates, participation requires unanimous consent of the committee members. Time permitting, I'll consider calling on such attendees at appropriate points, and we will presume that committee members consent absent their raising an objection. If any such participant would like to speak, please so indicate in the chat feature or by using Zoom's hand raise feature and wait to speak until I call on you. You can then unmute yourself and please remute yourself when you're done speaking. For all participants, please use the chat function only to indicate that you'd like to speak, or for committee members and their alternates to vote when asked. Please do not hold sidebar discussions or put substantive comments in the chat feature. Only members of the Rulemaking Committee, including government members and their designated alternates, public members, senior fellows, liaison representatives, and special counsels have a vote. Please do not vote, excuse me, unless you're a member of the committee. We have a list of committee members in case you're unsure. And so today we'll be reviewing council proposed revisions to the Rulemaking Committee's preamble and recommendation that were completed after 3 committee meetings that were already held. So the focus of the discussion will be on the revisions. I will provide Ron Cass, who's joining us from the council, to provide to give us an opportunity to give us an overview of the proposed revisions. And then we will provide an opportunity for Seth and Dan, if he's able to join us, with any initial responses. And then we will work through the proposed revisions. And the focal point will be the question of whether we want to accept the proposed revisions or not. We will not have time to engage in additional revisions of the proposals or of our own recommendations that we already voted upon as a committee. But there will be opportunity for discussions in terms of clarifications from Ron in terms of the council's thinking on the proposed revisions, proposed amendments to the recommendation, and any responses to anything that Ron says with respect to the proposal. But again, our focal point will be voting up or down on the council amendments, and we are under no obligation to vote either up or down. However we vote, the council will then proceed to decide how it wants to proceed with its amendments to the extent that the committee does not accept all of them. And then we'll return to our discussion of the committee preamble and recommendation at the plenary, which is coming up in a couple weeks. Okay. So let me start by welcoming Ron again to our committee meeting and an opportunity to share anything he'd like to share about the council's deliberation, and then any response that Seth wants to offer, and if Dan's able to join us, if he has any to offer at that point either as well. Ron, go for it.
Thanks, Berkeley. By and large, what the council was doing with this recommendation was saying that we thought it could be compressed some to make it a little bit clearer, a little bit more focused for people who haven't been party to all the background deliberations. And a lot of the proposed amendments are designed simply to do that. They're not designed to change in any way what the report says or what the thrust of it is. And that really is the bulk of the changes. There also was a thought that there was a little bit too much of a focus in some of the recommendation on the 2 executive orders. And executive orders are changeable. You don't know over time exactly what is going to be the status of them, whether they'll be changed by subsequent executive orders, changed in minor or modest ways, or changed in serious ways. And the council thought that to the extent we could truncate some of the discussion of the particulars of the executive orders and focus the recommendation more on the thrust of the orders and the thrust of what we saw as what the committee was doing, which is to both emphasize the importance of consultation and to try to come up with mechanisms that work well, procedures that work well. We thought that would be beneficial to the recommendation. So last, we thought that there was a need to recognize that in the procedures that were being recommended, there should be sensitivity to resource issues, both for the agency and for the state, local, and tribal communities that had to be responding to whatever was going on in the agency. And I want to just add one more thing, which is an after the fact comment. After the council sent its proposed changes to the committee, the consultants had an opportunity to respond. And I spent some of the last several days talking back and forth with one of the consultants. And no slight, Seth, to you, but Dan, I've known a long time, and so we were going back and forth on some of what the concerns were that Seth, you and Dan had raised to the suggestions from the council. And at the end of the process, I'm speaking for the council here, I think it's appropriate to take two things out of the package of proposed changes from the council. One is the paragraph that appears, I think, on the version circulated to the committee after our deliberations as a council. And I think that's at lines 39 to 42, if I recall correctly. That's a proposed new paragraph. And after talking with Dan, I think the council will remove that from the proposed changes. So we will delete that as a proposed addition to the recommendation.
Thanks so much, Ron.
And then one more
Oh,
thing,
sorry.
I just want to give time for Rakaja to do whatever manipulating she's doing here. The
So-
other is the council felt that the word dialogue sounded like it was not as general as the word discussion. I talked with Dan a good bit about this. Dan expressed the view that he thought that there were members of the relevant communities that really thought that it had a different meaning to them, and that this was an important meaning to continue to capture in the recommendation. And I don't think that any of us on the council felt strongly enough about the substitution of another term for that to insist on that. So I would be speaking again on the council's behalf, happy to simply recede on the substitution of discussion for dialogue at any place where that appears in the recommendation. And apart from that, I think that at least in my discussions with Dan, we ended up at the same point with respect to the remaining changes. And again, if at any point anyone wants a further comment on any of this, I'm happy to make it. But with respect to the removal of the paragraph on lines 39 to 42, the thought there was simply to emphasize by removing that the concern is not with preventing consultation or balancing the cost of consultation with the benefit of it, but rather the thought with respect to references to resources is simply to keep in mind that that's one of the things that ought to be borne in mind when we talk about the way we go about the consultation, that it's the method, not whether or not to consult, that was in mind for the council.
Thanks so much, Ron. We appreciate your explanations of the deliberations and your points about what the council has deliberated since the initial recommendations were sent back to us. I know, Seth, you weren't necessarily part of those conversations between Ron and Dan, but I know you joined a comment that you and Dan sent to the committee. I wonder if you had anything you wanted to elaborate beyond what was contained in the comments that were shared with the entire committee.
I'll just say two things very briefly. Ron, thank you for updating us on the council's position and your dialogue with Dan. I appreciate it. The only thing I'll highlight, this is the second point, and then I think we can, I would say, happy to hear what the committee thinks. The only point I would highlight picks up, Ron, on something you just said. So the council's focus was on costs related to the method of consultation, not whether consultation should occur. And I would say, I would just, as we go through lines 146 to 147, 214 to 215, and 254 to 255, I would say let's just review. I would encourage the committee to review those in light of the council's goal to introduce a consideration of costs with respect to the method rather than whether consultation occurs, and just make sure the phrasing proposed by the council at each of those places is consistent with that goal. It may very well be. I'm not trying to make a loaded comment. I just wanted to point that out for the committee to think about at each of those three places.
Could you state those three places? I got 214, 215, 254, and 255. And what was the third one? I'm sorry.
146 to 147. And this is just something I would say let's pause over
Okay.
to make sure it's consistent with the council's views.
Okay. Thank you so much, Seth. Okay. And any other initial comments from members of the committee or others that are attending here prior to going into the proposed amendments one by one? Okay. So what we'll do is some of these are, pretty basic stylistic changes that I'll just ask if there are any objections I'll ask if there's objections with respect to any of the changes made. I'm hoping that we'll be able to proceed pretty quickly with respect to the stylistic changes. Again, our focus is on voting up or down these proposed amendments without offering additional changes because I just don't think we have time to go through additional changes and reopening the process. So we'll start with the first proposed change in lines 1 and 2, which is a stylistic change. Are there any objections to that change in lines 1 and 2? Okay, we'll move forward and accept those changes. Line 7, there's the beginning of line 7, or the end of line 6 now, is the term meaningful that has been deleted. Are there any objections to the deletion of the term meaningful from that sentence? Okay, we'll accept those changes. Lines 7 through 12, or 7 through 11, excuse me. Yes, Bill.
This seemed to me more than stylistic because I thought the point of this sentence originally was that consultation is simply a different category of communication, not just a further step in something. And the substitution by the council just says it may not be as effective. It just talks about it. There may be get better information, but it wasn't the particular types of information that was the consultation was about. It was the nature of the interaction, right? That was a more formalistic relationship between governments. And I thought, and also the fact that it said consultation requirements, because it is a question of both under executive orders and some statutes that we do have actual requirements for consultation beyond what is normal informal communications. So I would still support the original formulation here and ask Ron, what the problem was here.
Yes, Ron.
So is the question with respect to the addition of all the other sorts of communication and interaction, or is it with the deletion of other terms? I'm not sure I understand the particular language that's seen as problematic.
Bill, do you?
Well, there were a couple of different issues in the deleted stuff. And what was deleted talked about consultation requirements. And I thought that was an important point because there are consultation requirements in executive order and statutes. And the substituted language doesn't have that idea in it at all. And it also it doesn't substitute for consultation. It doesn't replace the consultation requirement. So it wasn't just a question of which was more effective and whether there was some particular type of information that you'd get under consultation, which seemed to be the thrust of the new language. So I just thought I just like the original language better because I think it gets across the idea that the consultation is different in kind from informal methods such as listening sessions. And it also is something that's required in various circumstances. So I thought those are two important points to gotten across that are lost in the new language.
So would it be, would you view it as appropriate to keep that message there to say, well, informal outreach can be a valuable source of information. It may not be a substitute for required for an agency's consultation requirements.
Well, if you want to say it is not a substitute for consultation.
I don't think there would be any objection to that from the council.
Brigham?
Hi, thanks. And just by way of introduction, I'm a newly assigned member of the committee. I was very reluctant to mess with a process that's been undertaken for a while, but my comment was similar to the prior comments. In addition to the fact that I would contest the notion that consultation is a more effective means of gathering information than the informal means of information gathering. I actually think consultation is not a spectacularly good way to get information from and relevant to tribes. So I think the notion that this should sort of like compare the two methods of information gathering is not what the committee was likely after, and not sure it would be accurate to the extent it suggests that consultation would be better. But these proposed edits here sort of overtake all of my thoughts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Brigham. So I guess it'd be
And I just stopped, I'd say just period after requirement.
period after requirement. That's why I was going to ask if that's what the proposal is. Okay. And so as written there, is your belief, Ron, that the committee or the council would not disagree with that change? Okay.
My belief is that the council would accede to that.
Okay. Any objections to the change?
And I will just, while I have the floor for one moment, Virgil,
Sure.
say, since I am a technological Neanderthal, I actually don't know how to use the chat session. So I may just jump in uninvited, but I will apologize in advance.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds good. Thank you, Ron. Okay. All right, so those changes have been accepted. So now we have 8.9, which is again a stylistic change. It's adding moreover consultation. Are there any objections to that change? Adding the term moreover. Okay. We'll accept that change. Line 35, 37. This is the one that Ron commented upon at the beginning of our meeting. So that has been deleted. And so then line 35 through 37, a change in language here. I'll give you a chance to take a look at it and ask if there are any objections to the council's proposed change here. Are there any objections to the council's proposed change? Okay, we'll accept that change. Line 39 and 40, this has been moved mostly to a footnote that's at the bottom, in which it's elaborating on the program specific statutes and providing the citation to those statutes that's set forth here on footnote 10. And so Are there any objections to that change of deleting that sentence in 39 and 40 and adding the footnote into footnote 10? Okay, we'll accept those changes. Okay, so now with this next change, if you could scroll down a little bit, Kaja, for me, please. Thank you. So this change is one in which a paragraph is being added that is substituting for a much more lengthy discussion that extends to, in the previous version, line 100, but I guess it goes to line 89 in this version, or line 89 in this version. So I don't think we'll be able to get this all on one screen. I'm hoping you all have your own computers with this up. But the proposal would be to substitute the new lines 40 to 48, I think, or 49, excuse me, with what was there previously in 50 till 89. Now, Ron, as I understand it, this is an attempt to formulate what we were trying to say in a more concise form. Are there any other substantive changes that are embedded in here that we should be conscious of? Ron, you're
Sorry, it took me a while to
Yeah,
find
sorry.
not only do I not have the chat feature, I also have trouble turning audio on. There's nothing in here that was intended to be a substantive change.
Okay.
It was all intended to clarify and streamline, particularly given that this is all a part of the preface to the recommendation itself.
Right.
The normal practice in ACUS recommendations is to try to condense the prefatory material as much as possible.
Okay. Thanks, Ron. So, are there any objections to this streamlining of the preamble, part of the preamble here? Okay. We'll accept those changes then. So line 50, the deletion of line 50 and the addition of line 51 and 52 will be our next focal point. Are there any, I'll give you a chance to read it and then ask if there are any objections to the change proposed. Okay, are there any objections to the change, deletion of line 50 and the addition of line 51 and 52? Okay. Accept those changes. And then the next set of changes are we'll focus on are the sentence that starts on line 51 and concludes at the beginning of line 54. Thanks, Bakaja. Any objections to those changes? Okay, we'll accept those. And then now we're at line 53, the sentence in line 53 through 55, which is an addition to and it's replacing what was line 56 through 59. I see 2 points of this. It's removing the focal point on the executive orders, which was consistent with Ron's initial statement, and also streamlining a bit the paragraph. Any objections to those changes? Okay, we'll accept those. Okay, so line 56 through 58, the deletion of the sentence, the deletion of 2 sentences. Any objections to those changes? Okay, we'll accept those changes. And then lines 56, a sentence that goes from 56 to the beginning of 58. Any objections to those changes? Okay, we'll accept those changes then. Sentence that proceeds from 58 to 59, or 58. Oh, it becomes one sentence here. Sorry. Eliminate the beginning of 58 and proceeding through till 62, but the main changes on the only changes really on 58 and 59. Any objections to those changes? Okay, we'll accept those changes then. Okay, so here we'll start with the addition of the sentence on line 62 to 63, which essentially replacing the beginning of this paragraph that was originally line 63 to 65 at the beginning of 65. Any objections to those changes? And we'll accept. Okay. Okay. All right. And then I guess we'll just read the whole sentence, incorporating the changes that are made between 62 and 65. Any objections to those changes? Okay, we'll accept those changes. And then the final sentence of that paragraph starting in line, or final sentence of the paragraph starting in line 66 through 68, which is deleting. And the proposal also includes the deletion of original lines 68 to 671. Yes, Bill. You're mute, Brett. You're on mute, Bill.
Sorry. The last deletion here goes to the substance of what's in the recommendation. And that's something I did want to find out more about. And so I don't want to accept it as part of the preamble without discussing the substance of what's in the actual recommendation.
Okay. So you
I have no problem with the additional sentence. Right.
You have no problem with this. Okay. But you don't want to necessarily delete 68 through 71 before the recommendations.
Correct.
Okay.
And maybe this would be the time to talk about it, to sort of segregate a portion of the recommendation. I didn't see an explanation in what Jeremy said as to why the recommendation as to Congress
right.
And OMB, why that had been deleted. So I maybe Ron could address that.
I'm happy to do it. The feeling on the part of the council was that that part of the recommendation was going to be something that was unlikely to be acted on by Congress or OMB, and also the sort of thing that tends to get sort of negative feedback from those entities that we are trying to deal with to keep the agency's budget going and keep our relations good in terms of getting things actually accomplished. We thought the real work of this recommendation was in telling agencies what best practices were, and that part of the recommendation was extremely important to put in the best possible light to try to get action on it. And so the decision from the council was that the recommendation be stronger and more effective without the addition of those elements in it.
Well, if I could respond to that briefly,
Sure.
The amendments that got didn't change the recommendation to OMB. It only changes to the recommendations with respect to Congress. So the deletion of the reference to OMB in the preamble would seem to be inept. But with respect to Congress, I was willing to sort of suggest changes to what the recommendation currently says that might be directly responsive to what the council's concerns about a recommendation to Congress. Because there were a couple of things in the recommendation to Congress that don't have anything to do with money, and also are things that I think there wouldn't be political opposition to on either side of the aisle. They're fairly technical issues that I don't think anybody would really have an objection to, and don't really cost any money. And those specifically are the identifying the appropriate agency or agencies that would make publicly available the list of national organizations and centralized website. This was sort of a technical issue that would be very useful to the agencies in knowing who to consult with. If there was some sort of place that they could go to say, these are the people you can consult with, and to do this consultation. And that we discussed in the committee if we could come up with what agency should do that, and we decided no, that would really take more work, maybe a hearing to decide that type of thing, but that would be really useful to the agencies. They wouldn't object to it. And I don't see why it would cost any money. I would delete number 16 because that's just the kind of thing that I think is the most problematic. And then what's in the Freedom of Information Act thing again is I'd be willing to delete that, but it's also a fairly technical issue with respect to what the tribal governments have been concerned about, and I might let Brigham or Seth discuss that one. But I thought keeping 15 was important and really didn't raise the same issues with respect to costs and things that might upset people in Congress.
We'll stay here with the discussion on considerations for Congress since since Bill has led us off with that discussion. I wanted to get Seth's thoughts if he has any on the proposed deletion. The recommendation is built on the consultant's report, and the recommendations are drawn from the consultants and discussions that we've had in committee. So Seth, do you have any thoughts on the proposed deletion of the paragraphs under consideration for Congress?
I'll just share two thoughts. The goal of recommendation 15, which I agree is where we should focus, was to try to make the process more efficient and effective. The second thought that I'll share is I know the list of representative national organizations of state and local governments was, as I understood, especially important idea coming out of Dan's findings. With respect to representative national organizations of tribal governments, so intertribal organizations, that's important. We also, of course, stress in various places that talking with such an organization is not a substitute for government-to-government consultation with a tribal government. So those are the two thoughts I'll share.
Thanks, Seth. And Brigham, your name was brought up here. I don't know if you have any comments in response to Bill's comments.
I don't. I think I'm inclined to defer to the folks who've been involved in this for a while. I will say it seems like a sensible suggestion regarding the Freedom of Information Act, and could be a reason why tribes are reluctant to fully and frankly discuss at consultation things that could then be FOIA'd.
Thanks, Brigham. Ron, I'll give you a chance to respond now.
I'm not sure that the council would be terribly upset to have a version of this back end of 15. I do think, however, that it is unlikely that Congress would do much in this vein. It's just not the sort of thing that they often jump to as a freestanding matter to say, okay, this agency should do this or that. It may be better to request that of the president than of Congress to see which agencies are the appropriate ones to take this on. But if if it is a strong thing for the committee to have a request for Congress to do that, I don't think it will be something that the council would fight over. It's not something that would cause the council to say we're going to remove this from the items on the agenda. I do think that most things we recommend to Congress are recommendations that we as an agency feel are beneficial, but they're rarely going to be things that are going to be acted on. I'm old enough and have been in academic positions long enough not to feel that the fact that something is unavailing is a stopper to going ahead and doing it. So as I said, I don't think that's something that the council would fight over, but I think it's worth recognizing before we go forward.
Can I get this, like, just elaboration on this point, Ron, in terms of your concern about including in the recommendations some ideas that Congress may not only oppose, but would lead them to look upon the work of this agency in a bad light, or work upon ACUS or any other agency in a bad light. I think that comment was most relevant to 16 with respect to the funding idea. Do you think that that is also relevant, aside from the likelihood that Congress would pursue this proposal? Do you think that there are downside costs that we should be considerate of in including a proposal like 15 or 17, previous 15 or previous 17?
I think that the likely cost is less going to be from Congress, which when it is not in favor of something, tends just not to pay any attention to it. I do think that we're in an era where there is a pretty active review of what the benefits are of different agencies and different agencies' work. And anything that makes it look like ACUS is making recommendations that are not going to be availing, I think leads to a potential cost on that score. And I may be unduly sensitive to that right now, but like a number of people who are on this call today, I was somebody who lived through the ACUS defunding and was, I think I was a public member at the time of ACUS at that point, and just want to be careful that our reports are tailored enough that we don't sort of look like we're making not very effective recommendations, not ones that are likely to be acted on and produce beneficial changes for the government.
Thank you, Ron. Kevin.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the discussion. Thanks, Ron, for bringing these issues to bear. I wonder if this is just a question about whether, if we frame this recommendation in terms of efficiency, which is, part of what we've done, what the committee and the consultants have done, identified something that would be more efficient for agencies, which is if there was a central clearinghouse for this kind of information. So I wonder whether there's any possibility that would kind of temper on its face the idea that we're making, whether it's going to be action or not, but at least our aim is to make government work better, right? And sort of kind of put that straightforwardly in this, in order, certainly it goes to 15, in order to create, I should have drafted, anyway, I just want to get that thought in the conversation, which might also help blunt that a little bit.
Right.
If I can jump in there, Bertwhite, I think that's a good suggestion, and I think that if there's a way to couch that clearly as in order to facilitate efficiency among the agencies and reduce potential costs, Congress should consider. I think that would help with the council's view.
Okay. So
I certainly wouldn't have any objection to that.
okay, so in order to facilitate enforcement agencies into reduce potential costs, was that what you said, Ron?
And
Or
sure, yeah, or in consideration potential cost savings.
Okay, consideration of potential cost savings.
And reduce efficiency.
Yeah,
and reduce.
right. Yeah, after agencies
Yeah.
can just say and reduce potential costs.
Potential costs, okay. Okay.
And Ron, if I could just respond a little bit to the idea of, would Congress, just because we're recommending this, would Congress do it? And the answer is clearly not. But this is the kind of thing that it wouldn't come across their screen, all right, unless we raise it. And if it's, as I think, so unobjectionable, that as the sort of expert agency, ACUS is saying, hey, we found a little tinker that will actually do some good, real good, and bring it to your attention. So that's why I see this as fairly important. Bring it to their attention.
Right. Thanks, Bill. Seth.
So I would just suggest if we add in order to facilitate efficiency, which makes a lot of sense to me based on the research that Dan and I did, that in line 249, we might change use to contact or something like that. The misreading that I'm trying to deflect is the idea that ACUS is recommending that these organizations are the ones that should be consulted with because it is more efficient to do that.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Because
Yeah,
sorry.
I would only say that instead of in connection with, I would say respecting.
Sure.
Which both saves words and doesn't stress the word connection.
Okay.
In the Washington environment, I think that has some negative options.
Okay, so in connection with replaced with respecting. So should contact respecting consultations. Is that the language?
Yep.
Okay. Is that accord with your thoughts, Seth, as well?
I think it does. I see Brigham has some thoughts as well.
Yeah.
So those.
Brigham.
Yeah, I know I said I wouldn't talk, and yet here I am again. I was a little taken by the suggestion, I think was Ron's, which is that perhaps this is a suggestion for the executive branch and not for Congress. I don't know if that was meant as a suggested different suggestion, but I wanted to sort of air that because it seems to me that this is the sort of thing that the executive branch could do, whether through OMB or whether through the president or something like that. And I don't know if we're wedded to the idea that this is something that Congress should consider taking up, especially considering the fact that we all think that Congress won't. I don't know if it's a sort of suggestion that can be made generically to both branches of government, or whether we might want to consider making this suggestion directly to perhaps OMB, although.
Right. So Alex,
wanted to hear that concept.
Okay, thank you. Alex Goodenough's not here. I don't know if his designated alternate is here to opine on that.
I did see him.
He is.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, go ahead, please.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, Alex Hunt. I'm standing in for Alex Goodenough. And
Oh, thank you.
I think we would echo some of the points made earlier around resources and if we're talking particularly about the list of organizations and maintaining that the durability of such a list would be questionable if this task was assigned to OMB, but the more salient point, I think, is around resources and our ability to do these tasks that were assigned to Congress in this deleted section. Thanks.
Thank you, Alex. Jeremy?
Ron, just to clarify, your point was not that this necessarily needs to be OMB doing this. It would be to change it from Congress should identify to the president should identify, right?
Yes. Yeah. And it seems to me that what we're asking here is not something that is within the exclusive domain of Congress. It's not a matter of strong lawmaking. It's a matter of assignment of tasks to the extent that they're helpful and productive tasks. And I think also the overall the recommendation now has sufficient recognition of concerns about imposition on spending, that this wouldn't be a major imposition, and it's phrased as should consider rather than should do, which I think also reduces the sense of a requirement of doing something if it's not going to be worth the cost of doing it.
Alex, I just want to turn to you, Alex Hunt, in terms of, did your concerns still remain when the idea is for OMB to be assigned the responsibility of identifying the appropriate agency rather than developing and maintaining the lists?
Sorry, I'm on my phone, so
Oh,
let's
no worries.
the buttons here.
All good.
I guess I'd have to still think about that a bit more. I think it does create the expectation of, maintaining that list of agencies. And we still have the number 13 recommendation on issuing guidance, that only should issue guidance. We could perhaps identify the agencies to maintain the lists as part of that process of issuing guidance. But I didn't hear the previous comment as recommending that OMB be tasked, that instead it be the president.
It would be the president. Yeah, I just wanted to see if your concerns were still relevant to if OMB were tasked. But yes, the current proposal is for the president to be tasked that. I don't know how often ACUS makes recommendations directly to the president as opposed to the agency within the executive branch, but I haven't been here long enough to say one way or the other. So I'll leave it to the committee to decide whether the president's the appropriate person to task this responsibility to. Thanks, Alex.
Sure.
Bill.
If Ron thinks, speaking for the council, would prefer the president to Congress, I don't have any objection. I just want somebody to be responsible for, or to be notified that there was this issue that I think could be fairly easily satisfied. And so if I'm happy to leave it with the president.
Yeah. Any objections to the changes that are made to 14? Whether it be assigning to the president, whether it be the first line about facilitating efficiency among agencies and reducing costs. Reagan.
Sorry, yet again. It seems to me that if we're in the immediate preceding paragraph suggesting that OMB establish a tribal liaison, to me, it might as well be OMB that also takes the suggestion to identify somebody rather than going above them to the president of the United States. That's the sort of thing that if there's a tribal liaison that's supposed to do sort of government-wide coordination, all we're asking is that then the tribal liaison also figure out who should be the clearinghouse, whether it's Justice or Interior or somebody else, for these sorts of things, rather than suddenly leaping above on the organization chart to the president. And I'll try to stop talking.
No, please, your input is valued and we welcome it. So please don't feel like you have to mute yourself. Bill.
Well, I remember when Alex was here, Alex didn't feel comfortable with assigning it to OMB. He was happy. He was accepting of the other ones to OMB, but he in this one in particular, my memory was he didn't want to recommend to be OMB. Partially because for the state and local is different than the tribal, and so it may be different agencies, and so they thought if OMB was going to do it, they thought the president ought to tell them to do it rather than ACUS. That was my memory. So I still think it's better to have it the president here than try to add it to OMB's list of things.
That seems fine.
Yeah, and I would agree because of that point. Also, I believe there still is an Office of Intergovernmental Affairs within the Executive Office of the President. So if the recommendation was directed at the President, OMB is not the only option to deliver on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex.
I'll
Sorry, Ron.
I'll just add one thing here. That is, being old-fashioned, I view anything directed to the president not really being something directed to the president, but directed to whomever within the executive office of the president has responsibility for that, which is not something I think I can identify with this particular set of instructions from outside. I figured that would sort itself out. If anyone was going to do it, and the office that deals with that would identify itself.
Okay. Kevin.
Yeah, I was mainly going to ask for the views of Ron and others, as to, well, first maybe to Jeremy and others, which is has ACUS made a recommendation? We haven't made a recommendation to this president yet, have we? And so there's just a kind of sequencing. Is this the first recommendation we want to be putting forward to the president in light of some of the concerns Ron raised at the beginning? And I guess second question we go back to Ron would be, is this, maybe we have a good reason not to give it to OMB because OMB said it didn't want it. I sort of was otherwise convinced by Righam's comment that it seems a little funny to jump ahead, but anyway, maybe my just general concern is, are we comfortable? And I would love to hear a little bit more about this being possibly the first recommendation from ACUS to the president. And maybe it's the case that he hasn't been thinking too much about this agency.
Jeremy, I don't know if you have any responses.
I mean, certainly the last set of recommendations the agency adopted was in December. So this would be the first set of recommendations in the current administration.
I think it would be fair to say this probably wouldn't be the top of the list of things the president is focused on. And I do think generally when the council tries to take out things that we don't think are going to be acted on, we're not doing it primarily to avoid blowback, but I mean, that is on the table. And, I think generally we're in an era where people are looking harder than normal at what agencies do and whether it's worth doing and what the costs of it are. And to the extent we can avoid asking for something that raises that issue and isn't in any event likely to be acted on, I'm certainly in favor of taking those things out of the recommendation. So while I say I don't think the council would go to the mattresses over this, and I say that being married to a Rhode Islander, so I'm told that I need to be aware of expressions like that. I also think it would be a better recommendation without sending things to either the president or Congress that we don't expect they will be really likely to focus on.
I agree with that sentiment as well. I think that you assign something to the president, which means you're assigning it to everyone in the executive branch, which means you're assigning it to no one in the executive branch. And so I do have concerns about the reference to the president himself, but it's for the committee to decide on this proposed change. Bill, we have to move forward. We'll take one or two more comments, but then we'll move forward in deciding whether to accept the changes or not.
Yeah,
Bill?
I mean, I think one of the reasons we chose Congress originally was for the very concerns about trying to make a recommendation, especially to this president at this time. And we thought it was less objectionable to send it to Congress. As I said, I'm happy to send it to the president if the council would prefer it that way. But I still think both 14 and deleting what used to be 16, but keeping 15 are important. And because they are not controversial, they are bipartisan, they're good government. I don't imagine who would stand up and say no to that. And so the likelihood that it would be passed, if somebody slipped it into as a rider somewhere, I mean, I don't think anybody would object to it. I don't think they should. So I think it's incumbent on ACUS to point out to the people who can do something about these things that they would never know otherwise. That's what we're doing here. We're bringing to their attention something that they wouldn't otherwise be aware of, and that could make a step forward. Whether they act on it, that's up to them. We only ask them to consider it. That's my final statement.
Thanks, Bill. All right, so I'm going to just break this up into kind of 3 questions about objections or not. So the first question in terms of does anybody have a objection to the line is now currently 245, which adds the language in order to facilitate efficiency among agencies and to reduce potential costs. Does anyone object to the inclusion, to the addition of that line to line 14? Okay. We'll accept that change. Does anyone object to the change from the Congress to the president in line 246? Kevin, you object? Okay. Do you have an alternative to propose?
I like the Congress.
Okay. So so there's a objection raised. Does anybody object to the Congress being included as opposed to the president?
I would object to both. We are okay with the deletion. Representing this.
You would be okay with the deletion of the entire recommendation? Is that what you said, Alex?
That's right.
Okay. Okay, so we'll come up with the language that people can agree with respect to the recommendation 14, and then we'll decide on whether we should keep it or delete it entirely. So the Kevin's proposal is to add the language Congress, and for the does anyone object to Congress over the president? Okay, we'll
Would
keep
it soften it to say both?
Congress and the president,
Or so
or the president, or the
we're
president.
agnostic. We're not picky.
Okay, would that be seen as a friendly amendment, Kevin, or would you prefer Congress?
I think, just off the cuff, it seems like we're proposing we've gone back and forth. I guess I sort of feel like this is a kind of law reform sort of idea that at least institutionally would be appropriately addressed to Congress, whether the president could also act. Sure. So I sort of still kind of prefer keeping it directed to Congress. We've spotted something that should hopefully be non-controversial, and we're proposing it to them. Whether the president could come to their attention, and they could say, "Well, we want to act on this," they certainly would be able to do that.
Okay, so we'll since we have like a disagreement here, so let's just kind of take it to a vote so we could move forward. Those who are on the committee have a vote. If you could unmute your microphone, and I don't know, never mind, that never works. If you could just do a raise hand, if you all know how to do the raise hand feature. For all those who favor including the language Congress, please raise your hand on the hand raise feature. I can't see everyone's. Bakaja, can you see everyone?
Yes, I'm counting.
Okay, perfect. Keep your hands up until Bakaja tells me she's done.
All right, good, thanks.
Okay, and those who oppose the language, or right, put their hands down. Okay, and those who oppose the inclusion of the language Congress there, please raise your hand using the hand raise feature, or thumbs up, or whatever. Okay. You get all that, Bakaja?
Yeah, so I counted 5 for Congress, 2 against, not including Congress. So it looks like it will be
We'll
Congress.
keep Congress there, and we'll still have a vote on the overall recommendation, so never fear that. And then moving to line 249, any objections to the change in the language there, which is more a clarifying and streamlining change? Okay, we'll make that change. Okay. Okay, so we'll return to the council's recommendation, which is to remove this entire recommendation. Anyone object to the removal of this entire recommendation? The deletion of this entire recommendation? Okay, there's an objection.
This is a vote, right?
This is objection. Just we need somebody objection, and we'll take it to a vote next. Okay, so there's
Okay.
an objection. Okay.
Sorry, are we talking about what is now 14?
Yeah, what's now 14, deleting it entirely. The council's recommendation is to delete this entirely. Original recommendation. There's an objection to that recommendation. And the next thing we'll do is vote on keeping or deleting this recommendation. Okay, so all those in favor of keeping the recommendation, which is to reject the council's amendment, please show your hand.
Thank you.
Okay, hands down, please.
Andrew?
And then those who favor the council's recommendation, which would be to delete paragraph 14, please raise your hands now.
It looks like we are keeping the recommendation. So 7 for, 2 against.
Okay, so we'll keep recommendation 14. Council's next recommendation, and we'll keep in this paragraph since we've focused the discussion now, is to delete what is currently paragraph, what is this paragraph? Is this like currently paragraph, I guess 15 would this be, even though I'm kind of confused on the order. It's the one that describes about Congress should consider whether and to what extent available funding is sufficient, so on and so forth. And we've heard Ron's comments that are related to that recommendation. Are there any other comments that anyone wants to make before I ask if there's any objections to the council's recommendation? Okay. Are there any objections to the council recommendation, which is to delete the paragraph that begins Congress should consider whether and to what extent available funding is sufficient? Okay, no objections. We will adopt the council's recommendation and delete that paragraph. And the next recommendation is the proposal to delete the paragraph on the amending the Freedom of Information Act. Any comments generally about that particular paragraph? Bill?
Well, I object to its deletion. Again, this is something that is very technical. I don't see how it would raise anybody's hackles or bad feeling toward ACUS for making the recommendation. I think it's incumbent on us to bring a point that is fairly technical to their and uncontroversial to Congress's attention. So whether they act on it, obviously that's up to them, but I think it's incumbent on us to tell them what would be a good idea.
Thank you, Bill. Does anybody support deletion, the council's recommendation, which is to delete paragraph 15? In the absence of what's that?
Let me just add here quickly, Virtual.
Yes,
I think from the council standpoint, something like this, if it's included in a general recommendation looking at cleaning up aspects of the Freedom of Information Act, if it's addressing certain things that are integral to that in a context where it may be likely to get some attention from Congress, I think that is something that the council would view differently from just one more thing tacked on to a recommendation about consultation. So again, you know, I think our view is that these things that are added here as considerations for Congress at the end of this recommendation are things that are not likely to be acted on, and they're likely to be seen as just a sort of a filler at the end of an otherwise more useful set of directions to what agencies should do.
Thank you, Ron. Yes, Bill.
Ron, would it make you feel any better if it said that something along the lines, don't write it down, but something along the lines of Congress, in considering any amendments to the Freedom of Information Act in the future, should consider this?
Anything like that, Bill, I think helps. I don't think it, I don't think it undoes the general concern, but I do think that your instinct on how to word it helps in that somewhat. So, again, I think there are people who would ask at the plenary to have these sections removed, but I don't think it's the sort of thing that would in any way stop the council from, cause the council to say, well, let's not put it into the list of things to take up the plenary.
Bill, do you want to propose that change in language?
Sure.
And could you repeat that language?
Yeah. that I told you not to write down.
Right, exactly.
Congress, in considering
Future amendments to?
in considering future amendments to the Freedom of Information Act. Future amendments should consider, should include, after 552B, should include,
before 552B, right?
Meaning, no, to Congress and considering Freedom of Information Act with the citation, the freedom should include protection of.
Include protecting.
Okay, include protecting. No, just include.
For protecting?
No, just should include protecting it for certain, just protecting. That's it, fine. If Ron thinks that would help a little bit, then I propose that.
Yeah. Any objections to the proposed language? This is not acceptance or rejection of the entire amendment. It's just about the language that Ron has proposed here. Any objections to that proposed language addition or changes to 15?
I have a question. I had to leave the call for a few minutes, so I didn't hear what preceded this. But as I read what's on the screen now, I don't understand what the word certain refers to. Does that belong there?
Certain information deemed sensitive.
Yeah, should include protecting information deemed sensitive. Makes sense to me. What's the certain?
The idea is that some information that tribal governments might deem sensitive might not be protected by, perhaps should not be protected by the Freedom of Information Act, right? But certain types of it should be. So that's something that in adopting those amendments, well, people have to figure out. But this is the certain information is language that's always been there. It's been approved by the committee before. So I don't see that as being something we ought to be arguing about at this point.
Okay.
Any objections to the additional language or the proposed language change to paragraph 15? Okay, so we'll return to the initial question. Does anyone, so we have an objection. Does anyone want to support the council's amendment to delete paragraph 15? In this support, you don't have to say anything in support. You just have to say, I agree with the council's amendment, and then we'll bring it to a vote. Anybody agree with the council's amendment to delete paragraph 15?
I agree with it.
Okay. So we have an objection and agreement, so we'll take it to a vote. The first vote will be on the proposal to reject the council's amendment and delete paragraph 15. Those who support rejecting the council's amendment, which is to delete paragraph 15. Please show your hands or some hand raised.
So to be clear, we raise our hands if we want to keep this
If you want
paragraph.
to keep, yeah, that's a better way of saying it. Thank you, Bill. If show of hands if you want to keep paragraph 15 as written. Thank you. Okay, keep hands up till Bakaja gives me the word.
Okay, thank you.
And those who want to support the council's amendment and delete paragraph 15. So support deleting paragraph 15, please raise your hands.
Okay, we are keeping it.
Okay, so we'll keep paragraph 15. Okay, so now we'll scroll back up to the end of the preamble. And returning to you, Bill, you object to the deletion of the language on 68 through 71. Is that correct?
I object to the deletion.
Okay. Anyone support the deletion of the language proposed by the council? Alex, okay. And so we will vote on this in terms of those who support keeping the language in 68 to 71. Please show your hands. Okay. And those who oh, God, I'll wait till you're done. Sorry.
You're good. Yep.
Okay. And those who so Stephanie, that was a hand for. Was that a hand as well, Stephanie? Did we get you?
All right.
Okay. Got it. Okay. And those who support deleting the language. So Bill, put your hand. Yeah. Okay. So those who support deleting the language on 68 through 71, show your hands.
So we will be keeping the language.
We'll keep the language of 68 to 71. Okay. All right. So that concludes the discussion of the preamble. And we've also gone through 3 sets of recommendations. Hopefully we'll be able to work expeditiously through the rest. So we're now at 2B, which is the highlighted lines that Seth raised at the beginning. Is that correct, Bakaja? Is that what the highlights for? Yes.
Yes.
And so Seth, if you just mind raising your point once again here so that we are all clear as to the consideration that you want us to keep in mind as to whether we should keep this language or not.
This is one of 3 places where I think the committee should consider, in light of what Ron shared with us about the council's objective, whether to agree with the council's specific recommended language. As I understood it, and I'd love to hear from Ron. If I've misunderstood you, please let me know. But as I understood it, you had a discussion with Dan where you communicated that the council's view was not that there should be a cost-benefit analysis when the agency is considering whether to consult, but only with respect to the methods of consultation. My reading here, now that I'm looking at this language again, is that 84 to 85 does go to the question of whether to consult as opposed to the methods of consultation. I don't know if the committee reads it that way or not, but if the committee does read it that way, then I just urge the committee to think about whether it wants to agree with this change, and also would love to hear with Ron love to hear from Ron his thoughts about whether, in light of his conversation with Dan, this particular language should remain.
Thanks, Seth. Turn to Ron.
Yeah, I think I was reading this as not a question of whether, but as to how. And I'm not sure whether it's written that is clear. But that would be the question that we would be asking from the council.
Okay. So I wonder if the paragraphs both below at 1 through 3 are an indication that the B is about whether as opposed to how. So it's the, or sorry, I meant the lowercase 1 through 3 under B, because sorry, I'm not being clear here. Yeah, I'm wondering if those are more of an indicator of whether or whether they're an indication of how, something that we should consider in terms of thinking about Seth's comments and Ron's response. Bill.
Well, I had to say that I sort of read it the way Seth did here, that it was sort of a weather issue. These are the things you consider to decide whether or not consultation should occur. So in that case, I'd delete the consistent with resource and agencies need to act expeditiously here. It's, I mean, I don't have too much difficulty with the concept of everything being consistent with available resources and agencies need to expeditiously. But here, I think it seems to apply to the whether rather than the how. Later on, we'll see a how and be appropriate there.
Okay. Thanks, Bill. So, so I guess we'll raise it. Are there objections to the council's proposed amendment, which is to add the language consistent with available resources and the agency's need to act expeditiously? So there's an objection. Are there?
Yeah, I think I have to. Yeah.
Okay. Is there someone who wants to express support for the council's amendment to add the language to line 84 and 85? Okay. And so we'll vote. So those who oppose the addition of language, the language in 84 and 85, please show your, Amy, is that a comment or is that a vote?
Sorry, that's my vote.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so yes. So those who oppose the removal of the addition of the language in 84 and 85, please show your hands.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and those who support adding that language to 84 and 85, the council's amendment, please show your hand.
We will be removing it.
Okay, so the language is removed. Moving to lines 86 through 90. It's change. I believe this is more of a stylistic change than a substantive change here, in moving things around in the paragraph. Anyone object to the changes in 86 through 90? Okay, we will accept those changes. Okay, so 995 is a cross-reference. I guess I'll ask a question. Are there any objections to the cross-reference, which is to 8 and 11? I don't know if it's still 8 and 11 anymore.
Bertrell, I'm sorry, but if we went back to D,
Yes.
on what, let's see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it would seem to me this is where the language that Ron had suggested should be.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, I voted to take it out earlier, but I would think it would be appropriate here at the very end of D, comma, and then that phrase consistent with whatever it was.
So in paragraph 8, if you scroll down, Bakaja, there is that line in paragraph 8 that is cross-referencing it, referencing to. So I don't know if you want to add that to also to the paragraph D that we were just discussing.
Yeah, that's what I'm suggesting, is to add it to D, because I think that's what Ron really was trying to get across.
Okay, so then we will remove the cross-reference because then it will just cross-reference the same thing.
Well, I'd put it here because it's, I mean, I put it here. You could put it both places, but I think you could put it here. At D.
I certainly think it's helpful putting it there, and I don't think it has to be deleted in the cross-reference.
Okay. Any objections to adding that language to 97, 98, the end of D? Okay. Include that language. All right, so here's line 100. And again, more stylistic, deletion of words, streamlining. Any objections? Okay, we'll keep that change. Line 102 is just defining what it is as the policy or action. Any objection to that change? Okay, we'll make it. Okay, now line 144 through 146 is the deletion. And this, we had a discussion about this in the committee, in which we made some modifications to the language, but now the proposal is to delete the language in 144 to 146. And I just would like, because there are folks that weren't here at the prior meetings, if Seth would mind offering the reason why we decided to include this language in the first place based on the consultant's report.
Sure. I will highlight for those who are not aware, I was not able to attend the last of the committee meetings. And so due to a health emergency, so I cannot convey anything about what was discussed at that third and last meeting. This was raised, however, at the second of the committee meetings, and there was a discussion about the finding in the report that there has been a problem with agencies not taking tribal input seriously. I shared, for instance, my own experience being on the non-tribal governmental side of this issue. Others brought it up as well. Those were the reasons for including it. There is variation among agency policies on this issue, which is to say some agency policies identify the issue and have language that is along these lines. Other agency policies do not.
Thank you, Seth. Bill.
I was at the last meeting, and originally this language was a commitment to respecting tribal sovereignty, et cetera, and indigenous knowledge. And I objected to in saying that it sounded like you had to do what you had to act consistently with indigenous knowledge. And I thought that was inappropriate. And so we changed it to not respecting it, but to valuing it and incorporating it when appropriate, permitted by law, which was sort of softening it. But calling it out is something to be considered valuable, but not necessarily to be incorporated. So that's how this particular language got in. But I mean, I'd be interested in hearing from Ron with the reason the council wanted to take it out.
I think it comes across to the council as an add-on that may be intended to do something more than respecting tribal sovereignty. But I'm not sure what the more is that it does. And it certainly sounds to me like the sort of language that agencies would not find very helpful in guiding decision-making, and looks certainly from my vantage, and I think from the council's vantage, like something that doesn't really contribute much to the recommendation and may result in more resistance to the recommendation.
Thanks, Ron. Stephanie.
Thanks. That's helpful. That's helpful because I was wondering as well about the reason for deleting it, and I've shared some of Seth's experience as well, having been on the government side and working on tribal consultation. I would retain the language, or if it needs to be more specific and helpful, for lack of a better word, because I kind of recall that there was also discussion about whether indigenous knowledge and traditions should be considered on the same level as tribal sovereignty, treaty rights, and reserved rights, whether we can refer to tribal laws, traditions, and practices, because those are in fact established things in tribal cultures and in tribal nations. They have their own laws. There may be implications for tribal laws created by federal action, and it seems reasonable that we would encourage agencies to consider that. I also I hesitate whether to say this, but I think it is important. I am currently speaking to you from Pueblo land. I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I am very familiar with the ways in which the government has interacted with the tribes and the Pueblos in this area for a long time. And I think it does not hurt to remind the government that, or to make recommendations that acknowledge that these things do have value and should be considered, because that has not always been the case.
Thank you, Stephanie. And you're okay with the language commitment to valuing as a proper instructions?
I do. I think that's reasonable, because I agree with Bill that there may be occasions where it's not appropriate to necessarily incorporate those, but I also think it's problematic to not have language that reflects that, because there is a history of disregarding tribal views, tribal values, and tribal laws.
And let me go to Ron before I come to Bill. Would that be responsive to the council's concerns, or do you still sense that it lacks sufficient specificity?
So I think it would be seen as an improvement over simply a reference to indigenous knowledge. But I do think that there would still be a sense that the instruction to respect tribal sovereignty, treaty rights, reserve rights, and other rights would be sufficient in terms of the directive in consultation, rather than having to add the additional language here. But again, I think the change that is being recommended is a positive change from the standpoint of the council. I do think, again, it looks like it goes sort of gilding the lily here, but I don't think it goes beyond that. It's not a substantive objection so much as it is a stylistic one at this point.
Thank you, Ron. Bill.
Initially, the trouble is that other rights refer to rights. Here we're talking about things that aren't rights. These tribal laws, traditions, and practices don't rise to the level of rights. So that's why it's an addition to what's there previously. My question to Stephanie would be, would you be willing to make a period at the end of practices and deleting and incorporating it into decision-making when appropriate, permitted by law? I mean, that still softens it more, but it's, I mean, I'd be happy with just putting a period at the end of practices.
I think that would be fine. I think that would be fine. I would accede to that.
I just want to sort of make sure that Seth, as a consultant on the report, and who had a particular focus on this aspect of the report, whether those changes would follow from the report's findings. That change that Bill has just proposed would follow from the report's findings.
I do think that what would be here is consistent with the report's findings. The phrase incorporating it into decision-making when appropriate and permitted by law was a phrase that I think I had suggested to staff at some point after a committee meeting, and I got pulled back in. And the aim of it was to try to reflect the committee's sense that it may sometimes be appropriate and permitted. It may sometimes not be appropriate and permitted. I think that was when we were focused on the language indigenous knowledge. So if the committee is comfortable that a commitment to valuing tribal laws and traditions is preserves the appropriate level of discretion for agencies, then I would say it's consistent with the findings of the report.
Thank you, Seth. Are there any objections to the change that's proposed by Stephanie, which is to add the language tribal laws, traditions, and practices in the place of knowledge and I forgot the other one. Anyways, anyone object to the change that Stephanie has proposed? Okay. Does anyone object to adding this language, which would mean rejecting the council's recommendation of deleting the language that came before?
I just have a suggestion.
Okay, please.
I don't want to. I wonder whether I'm a little confused by a commitment to valuing. I wondered whether a commitment, this would soften further, but commitment to consideration of. I don't know. We could have a philosophical discussion about how an agency would demonstrate its valuing in addition to or in contrast to consideration of, and that I think would help me address some of Ron's concerns.
Would you object for parallelism's sake, using commitment to considering, since we use commitment to respecting at the beginning of C?
No, committed to consideration. Yeah, that sounds fine to me.
So it'd be commitment to considering the tribal laws, traditions, and practices, and removing the valuing. Does anyone object to that amendment? Stephanie, would you see that as? Oh, I guess you didn't propose that. You just said tribal laws and practice. Well, does anybody object to replacing valuing with considering? Okay. So back to the original question, we'll go with considering. Does anybody does anyone object to the changes that were proposed by Stephanie and Kevin with respect to the language in C and rejecting the amendment? So keeping the language here. Anyone object to keeping the language that's here right now? Okay, so we'll make these changes and keep this language. Excuse me. So then there's a deletion of 46, 146, 147. Ron, could you clarify the purpose? Is this redundant? Is that the reason why this?
I think that's exactly what
Okay.
what the thinking was.
Okay. So any objections to deleting 146, 147? Bill?
Sorry, I was on to the next one.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so we'll delete that paragraph on 146, 147. Haven't heard, no objections. And then we're back to the whether and how question with respect to 140, now currently 146, 147.
And
Bill,
that looked to me like a whether again.
Whether, yeah, it did me too.
So
Seth or Ron. So I'll go Ron, then go to Seth. Sorry.
Yeah, I think it's that it should occur consistent with the available. Not and the timing would be the agencies need to act expeditiously, sort of. But this is it again. This is designed to be about how it's done.
Okay. So Ron, you see this as a how question rather than a whether question. Yeah. Okay. Seth.
So we have the parallel language in state and local above, which looks exactly like this. And the committee had determined that they understood that language with respect to state and local to be about whether. So if it's about whether there, I think it would be about whether here. And if the language proposed by the council is retained here, then you're setting up a distinction between state and local and tribal, and I'm not sure why you would do that. I think down below, we've talked about that it's how, but I think if the committee determined the same language above for state and local was about whether, then it strikes me it's about whether here too.
Thank you, Seth.
Yeah,
Bill?
Ron, I mean, to be consistent with the other thing, we take it out here and put it in a subparagraph later down. Just there's a, well, you know, there's one that comes procedures. You have D, right? D, the procedures, and that's where we put the language, not in B, D. D is in delta, and at the end of D is delta. That's where we put the language. This is the how. So it's taking it one place and putting it another. I think that's consistent with what you.
As long as we have it in both categories, that's fine.
So the proposal.
We take it out of
of
the first one and put it in D.
Okay.
Take it out of that D and put it in F, end of F.
End of F, exactly. Okay. All right. So anyone object to that change of removing it from D and putting it into F? Okay. Moving on to 148 through 151. This is again a streamlining. It's the same streamlining that was done earlier that we agreed to. Anyone object to the change here? Okay. Make that change. We've already agreed to the change in F, and we'll keep the cross-reference. Okay, and then now the question is deleting F, which is line 162 to 164. Ron, what's the reason that the council wanted to delete F?
Let me see if I can get back up to where we are here.
I'm sorry. Yeah, take your time.
See what this is following.
Yeah, it's all kind of mixed paragraphs now, mixed numbers.
For Charles, if I can jump in.
Yes,
I think it was just a lack of understanding of what this paragraph was actually getting at, in particular, what parties, among which parties are protocols shared, and is it among agencies or with tribes? It was just a lack of clarity as to what this paragraph was actually saying.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. Seth.
To answer that question, this paragraph was added, as I recall, after the second meeting, which I did attend. I think that actually this paragraph may no longer be required because of the change from indigenous knowledge to tribal laws, traditions, and practices. The simple purpose of this was in meeting number 2, through discussion, the point was raised that sometimes tribes have their own consultation practices, and sometimes agencies know that, and there are particular agencies that recognize those, the fact of tribal practices, and then say in consulting with that tribe, we will have procedures that are shared between us that reflect those practices. It's not something that I think the recommendation was intending to flag the issue for agencies that might not be aware of it, suggest to them that they might consider being open to doing this, because this is a thing that some agencies do when they have these interactions with tribes and become aware of tribal consultation practices. Given that there's now been an edit above that points to tribal practices and says agencies should consider them, I think that this is just a particular instance of consideration of tribal practices and perhaps could be cut. So that's the background, so everyone understands the background to it.
Thank you, Seth. So having with that information in line, any objections to the deleting of paragraph F, lines 162 to 164? Okay, we'll delete F. Now there's changes to the which I guess will be the new F, for lines 163 to 169. And so I feel like this is mostly streamlining. The deletion of the parenthetical signals to me that that was not deemed necessary. Give you a chance to read through this and hear if there's any objections to the changes to paragraph F. Okay, we'll make those changes then. All right, so any objections to the grammatical change in 180? Okay, we'll make that change. This is the consistent with available resources, and this is going to the question of whether it's appropriate here, whether this is a whether or a how question, whether agencies should consult or how agencies consult. I think that
This is a timing question rather, this is related to the timing rather than the whether to consult.
Okay,
I agree.
okay. Anyone object to the addition of this language to line 181 and 182? Okay, we'll add that here. Grammar fix on 182 to 183, moving normally to before should. Okay, any objections? No. Okay, moving forward. Okay, so this is addition to line 200 and 201. And it describes the benefit of subsequent consultation relative to the resources, and it's a consideration or instruction or recommendation that is cognizant of resource constraints. And I think this relates to your prior comments, Ron. Do you have anything to add on this point?
No, I think this one, again, this is the question, not should there be any consultation,
Right.
but should there be additional layers? And if so, are they consistent with both emergency, timing, and resource issues?
Thank you. Any objections to the addition of this language to 200, 201? And 202, 203. Okay, we'll add that language. So we'll look at paragraph 10. Any objections to the changes that are made in 205 to 208? Okay, we'll make those changes. No objections. So moving on to the oversight of the consultation, there's the addition of the language efficiency, and the language as applicable to paragraph 12. Any objections to those changes? Okay, we'll accept them. And we went through considerations for Congress already. And I think that that's the end of it. Is that correct, Bakaja? Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you all for taking the time to for this unplanned meeting, and thank you, Ron, for sticking with us and providing us with information about the deliberations of the council. And we have put forth our thoughts on the council's recommendations, and we've made some other adjustments, and we'll look forward to hearing the feedback from the council, likely at the plenary coming forth in early January. I don't know if Kaja or Jeremy or Bakaja have any additional closing notes on this. I just want to say, again, thank you all for your patience and your attention and your time and your resources and your capacity on this. Thank you, Seth, in particular, for the work that you've done along with Dan Rodriguez as consultants on this particular set of recommendations. And if there's nothing more to say, I will look forward to seeing many, if not all of you in DC in a couple weeks. All right. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.